So it's my privilege this morning to moderate the VC panel. We've got four of the leaders of venture capital in Australia and across Southeast Asia with me this morning. So I might just do a quick introduction of the four of them, and then we'll jump straight into it. On my left, I have David Gowdey. David Gowdey is the co-founder and partner of Jungle Ventures, a Singaporean-based VC fund. Craig Blair, the co-founder and partner of Airtree Ventures. Niki Scevak, the founder of Blackbird, and Tony Holt, the co-founder of Squarepeg. Maybe first to you, Craig. You've been in the industry in Australia for some 20 or so years now and have seen how the landscape has changed, probably dramatically, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years with the large amount of capital that's flown into the industry. It'd be great to get your perspectives on how the landscape has evolved.
Yeah, sure, thanks. I think the first thing is that VC's got a lot to apologise for in its sort of first 10 years of existence, from sort of late 90s into the sort of mid-2000s or late 2000s. And that's apologising to investors for returns that frankly sucked, and then apologising to founders for a bunch of bad practices that crept into the industry, not just in Australia but globally. That's from term sheets that were just nefarious through to the way the interactions with founders. And so I think the good news is a lot of that's changed now. I mean, I see there's still change that can happen from here, but the first thing, we've got some VCs with well constructed and thought through investment thesis, and there's a few up here. VCs that are founders or operators. I think from the old days, there's a lot of VCs that banking analysts. Not to say you can't be a VC if you come from that direction, but generally it helps to have been in the founder's seat if you want to try and help a founder succeed. And then I think the third thing is a lot more capital, as you said. There's a well-trodden path now in Australia from seed round right to Series A. I think now increasingly there are more funds, and there are a few here who can support a founder from a $200,000 investment up to a $20 million investment, and that's something that hadn't existed before. So I think that augurs well for where we are. We've got a lot to do. We're all working hard on doing things like investing heavily in terms that are standard and fair, and not avoid wasting time on lawyers. That's just one of many initiatives we're all working on to try and make this sort of VC service delivery to our founders more effective. And I think there's never been a better time to raise capital in Australia.
Thank you. Niki, you've sort of been in the industry now for 5 or 6 years, and I guess you've seen multiple federal governments in the short time that you've had Blackbird up and running. When Turnbull joined as Prime Minister, he said a lot about innovation and us becoming a technology-led country, and investment in technology. What are you sort of seeing that's changed in the last 18 months, and what do you think needs to change further for us to sort of get to where we need to get to?
I'll give a little bit of a unique answer. Maybe the default is always sort of more things they could be doing. But I think if you just sort of took a step back and said, what have they actually done already, which is an incredibly generous environment, like our investors pay no tax. We pay a lower tax than other private equity managers on the profits. The companies that get the money usually spend the money on hiring people who, at the end of the tax year, you get 42.5 cents in the dollar back from the product and engineering people. So I think there's simply not that much stuff they can do, and then if they did something, would it really matter? And I think what matters is people like Richard choosing to build a wonderful company over a long period of time, and the more people that do that, that's going to create the ecosystem. If you look at Silicon Valley, the magic of that area is when people build successful technology companies, they invest and they help the next generation of entrepreneurs succeed. So I think kind of doesn't really matter what the government does, but it does matter that we have these great lighthouse companies that will inspire the next generation.
Thank you. David, you've spent time in both Australia and now Southeast Asia, and you've got a hugely successful fund up there. I guess, what are the sort of the main differences that you see in the Southeast Asian market as a place of venture capital compared to the market that we have down in Australia?
So I think both markets have changed a huge amount just over the last 2 years. If you think about the venture capital ecosystem that's formed here versus where the market was 5 years ago, it's dramatically different. So access to capital is much easier, and capital, I think, at all places within the stack. And Southeast Asia has gone through a similar evolution. I think the difference is that 5 years ago there was a very low base of consumption in Southeast Asia, and smartphones have completely changed that. And so now you have smartphones, you can now buy a $35 or $50 smartphone in Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia. And I know we have some talks, I'm giving a talk later about a little bit around this, about the opportunity that's up there, but the size of the market is just dramatically different. And so finally, you have the market hitting an inflection point, consumption hitting an inflection point, and you have the amount of capital, a venture ecosystem that's been formed to fund a lot of that growth. So it's an exciting time, I think, in Southeast Asia.
Tony, if we could jump to people or to founders. Obviously, the founders are at the core of the companies that you invest in. I guess it would be great to hear from you on the sort of people you invest in, how you foster the talent, how you help the founders take their idea and business and build it into a global business.
Yeah, there's a couple of elements to that question. In terms of founders, there is no mould. Founders come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes and backgrounds and skill sets and so on. But I think one of the things that exists as a common feature is an authenticity of the problem that the founder is trying to solve. And again, there'll be all sorts of exceptions to this general statement, but people who are solving problems through personal experience, experience in their business life, tend to be those that come at it with an authenticity that leads to a real understanding of the problem that's being solved. And that is, again, many exceptions to that, but the genuine understanding of a problem, the real experience in that is a common feature of a founder who is solving a problem in a very significant way. Obviously, we look at all sorts of other things around that, including the scale of the problem that's being solved and the competitive dynamic, the unique features of the problem that's being solved. But it really comes down to the passion and the skills and the flair and the drive of an entrepreneur with a background that's usually rooted deep in the problem and an understanding of it that is so important to the ability to solve it. On the second part of your question, Andrew, in relation to what do we do to help, and I think some of the other folks on the panel have touched on this in terms of what's the composition of the venture capital business that we have and Craig and David and Niki have that's important in terms of the ability to help the entrepreneurs that we're working with. One is being sensible and friendly from a perspective of terms. There's no set of terms that are going to turn a bad investment into a good outcome. And so focusing on supporting an entrepreneur in a sensible manner is really important. We've also focused amongst our partnership, in particular at Squarepeg, at saying we've got quite a large partnership for the pool of capital that we manage. We have 9 partners in different parts of the world, and we've got a spread of backgrounds. And I'm from a finance background myself, and can perhaps add less to founders than many of my other team members who are operators by background. And so we have a mix, and the ability to help all sorts of different founders at different stages, and questions about how do you scale a business, how do you take a business from here to there, what have we done in the past, how do you get products on shelves. And we've got that sort of experience that comes from our own operational experience being really important to add to the founders. It's very important. I mean, board seats are fine. We tend to take significant minority positions. That's a help, and the time that you can contribute and the mentoring. But it's very important that you've had that genuine experience amongst your group to be able to really contribute.
Thank you, Tony. David, we were just discussing earlier some of the sort of interesting models that you're undertaking with regard to talent in Asia and the way that you're applying talent and bringing them into new business models, almost a sort of a twist on the standard way that VC invests in founders.
Yeah, so Jungle, we operate a seed platform as well as a Series A fund. And so Singapore has a certain level of magnetism now around it. So if you think about the Valley, if you really wanted to be in the tech space, there's the largest number of companies were based in the Valley. There's a magnetism around the Valley that people wanted to go there and experience and work and grow. And Singapore is now the hub for most businesses in Asia. So if you think about Facebook or Twitter, Google, Yahoo, most global companies are basing themselves out of Singapore. And so you get a large number of expats. Google's up to, I think 2,000 or 3,000 employees now. And so one of the things that we've been doing is trying to get some of those folks to leave and to take the jump into doing startups. And so a lot of times you see, folks move across from the US, they spend a year or 18 months in Singapore, they realize how much opportunity there is in the region. And then the seed platform has just been an interesting kind of place to drive entrepreneurs and residents, let people step out from the larger businesses, give them a little bit of capital, and let them take a lot of the expertise that they've built up. And the great thing about coming out of a Google or a Facebook is you have a lot of great systems and processes that you get taught within those businesses, and take a lot of that out into form of startups, and hopefully bring some of the talent out and drive a team around that.
Thank you, David. Craig, it feels like the VC industry in Australia, as part of that evolution you touched on before, is becoming, the industry is becoming increasingly global. We've always had US funds flowing into Australia in Series A, Series B. We're seeing more of that. We're also seeing more of the VCs in Australia investing offshore. Would you be able to talk a little bit about the globalisation of venture capital?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting dynamic, and it really reflects the journey of Australian founders. I mean, there was a day when many Australian founders would attack a local market and maybe stay here or go global from there. There's some huge billion-dollar-plus businesses we all know about in the first generations, the Seeks of the world, the REAs of the world. But increasingly, we're seeing founders starting with the global aspirations from day one, and to do that, they have to compete in the world stage. So they need world-class founders attacking global markets, and so they deserve and need world-class VC. So I think the first thing I don't think there's any such thing as a local VC. You have to be a global best practice VC, because any good founder will have choices, and they'll want to bring you along for the ride and help and have you contribute to the journey. And I think, what does that mean? I mean, I think from our perspective, it means that you obviously relationships with global VCs. We've been lucky enough to co-invest with Excel, Union Square Ventures, Sequoia. That's happening. You guys, all you guys, and I think this is happening more and more as founders construct a cap table and around to suit where they want to go and the support they need along the way. The second thing is, how do you build world-class VC? And for us, it's very much about having the people on your team who have experienced that sort of journey. And so, we've recently announced a hire. We brought James Cameron in from Excel Ventures. We've got John Henderson in from Whiteside Venture Capital and Facebook. Julia French from Dropbox, WhatsApp. So this sort of re-importing the sort of brain drain that we use coming out into sort of back into Australia to bring world-class sort of talent, I think is something that we're doing, but I know everybody's trying to solve this problem. And I think the third part is, and Tony talked about this, is what can we add over and above capital? If all of us are just adding capital, then we probably wouldn't have a job. So we need to think about what else do you contribute, and how do you differentiate yourself in a world where good founders have choices. And I think you'll see different models emerging. For us, it's all about service layers. We're building a sort of recruitment and people function to help people build teams on the ground. We're building marketing and PR functions. That's not saying the right model, but it's our model. But I think you're going to see this services layer going much deeper than you have in the past.
Thank you, Craig. Niki, if you're spending some time perusing your website over the last week or so, I've noted that the investments you made maybe a few years ago were predominantly in software as a service and digital type platforms, and now there's sort of maybe been a transition to more engineered products, robotics, these sorts of things. Could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing and investing in today, and how that's changed over the last couple of years?
Yeah, the original hypothesis of Blackbird was to invest in software companies that were trying to be the best in the world and sold all around the world from day one. A few years ago, we just sort of noticed some of the more interesting people that we'd get to talk to focusing on other areas, autonomous vehicles, areas of robotics, and so in space and so on. And we had probably the same reaction as anyone else in the room. On the outside, it looks like science fiction, and you're going to lose your money like people lost their money decades ago. But I think what was very different and interesting the more you dug down was, even though it did look like a science project, under the hood it looked like a software company. So it had the same iteration cycles of a product that you made progress within months, not years. It had the same benefits or same sort of standing on the shoulders of open source software and other kind of assembling of things rather than having to invent them. And the sales cycles had come down. So, for instance, we're an investor in a company that's making a LiDAR, which is the chief sensor of a driverless car. So have you ever seen that Google car, the thing on the top? Currently costs $75,000, which is more than the entire thing beneath the little thing on the top. And we invested in a seed round to people who would worked at a optical telecom company, so using concentrating on technology around the backbone of the internet and how to switch optical routers, and applying that to LiDAR. And in under a year, they've iterated on the product. They're paying customers. They have people using the product, and quite frankly, that's a faster pace than we saw even at other software companies, a traditional SaaS company or marketplace company. And so I think what's really interesting is having the most ambitious Australians kind of turn their attention to these kinds of areas. I think even on a world stage, if you look at Elon Musk, he started a restaurant review site, then a payments company, and then a interplanetary civilization company. So founder of Braintree started Braintree. Now he started a company that emulates the human brain. So I think you're seeing the evolution worldwide of people ramping up their ambition and choosing to tackle harder and harder problems. And then I think you have all this software that was created in solving virtual problems that is now being able to apply to kind of real world problems via robotics.
Thanks, Niki. Tony, if you think about your the portfolio of things you've got in your funds as well, it has changed over the years. What's your current approach and investment thesis, and can you talk a little bit about the different regions you're investing in today and the businesses that you're seeing?
Yeah, there's a couple of points that some of the folks on the panel have touched on before, and I think they're really relevant to the way that we think about the portfolio within Squarepeg. The business of venture capital and the companies into which we're investing are typically solving problems that have global application. And so we think there's real benefit for us in having the diversified geographical presence that we have, and it allows us to make decisions and comparisons and partner with various people in different regions, and generally to improve decisions across each of the regions in which we are able to invest. So I think that's one very important point. I think the other area that we do have within our group is various expertise in and history in investing in software, history in marketplaces, expertise in IoT and connected devices. We have naturally a skew towards those sorts of areas within our portfolio, but we're in a business where the world is constantly changing, and to get a level of comfort and to focus purely on what we've done historically means we're going to fall behind the game. And so part of our test, and we constantly test and push ourselves, is to be using the expertise that we have, but evolving rapidly and learning off that base so that we're looking at new things all of the time. So those elements of an expertise in an area, evolving from that and using a diverse geographical construction is sort of elements that are really important to us. What it looks like in 3 to 5 years' time is going to be very different from what it looks like today.
Thanks, Tony. Craig, your fund recently invested in a friend of mine's business, the smart headphones. Sorry, was that? Oh, sorry, Niki. Sorry, Craig. Kyle, since Kyle was the humble IT guy at my former employer, he's come on in leaps and bounds. It's a pretty exciting business that he's invested in. Would you want to talk a little bit about it and why you think that it has global applications?
So the business is called Neura, which is basically creating a new kind of headphones that runs a hearing test in the beginning to create sort of a unique profile of everyone hears differently, like everyone sees differently, and you don't really notice it until you have had sound played back to you that is personalised to your own hearing. And so I think what we look for is these kinds of founders like Kyle and Luke and Dragon who have just this deep passion for solving a problem and want to solve it in such a way that is leaps and bounds better than the existing solution. And in the case of Neura, it is a set of headphones that literally, when you listen to the sound as compared to a normal set of headphones, it's just a dramatically better product and a dramatically better listening experience. And then, I kind of look through the lens of, we don't want someone to have an exit strategy, we want them to be doing their life's work. And so you kind of examine why, that person's life had led them to the moment to found the company, what is driving them, why they're doing their life's work. And I think in Kyle's case, at least now, and obviously with the caveat that nearly every venture capital investment does not work out, but you can really get the sense that the team is really on a mission to create something over a very, very long period of time.
Thank you. And David, you have sort of, your fund has a slightly different take on it. We've seen that you've often invested in Australian businesses and taken them into Southeast Asia. If they can prove their business model in Southeast Asia, then it's probably one that you're likely to want to back.
Yeah, well, I think certain business models lends themselves to be global, have a global applicability. Software, if software works in Australia, it should work in most places. And from a sectoral focus, we also focus on a lot of categories which tend to be more regional based category leaders. We invest in software and some businesses that we anticipate will be global, but the main focus of what we're doing is really around regional category leaders. And so as a result of that, everything that we do tends to have a nexus back to Southeast Asia. And part of that is, goes back to the operating and the value add is, companies that are in Southeast Asia, we can add a lot more value to because we're there. And so as we look to make investments in Australia or India or the US or other places, it tends to be in businesses that are expanding into the region or see the region as being core to their operations. And then it falls upon us to really help them with hiring, with rolling out across the multiple markets, understanding the differences between the regulatory environments around Southeast Asia, and then building a strong regional business.
Thank you, David. And Craig, perhaps just to finish off the panel session today, it's obviously a very exciting time in the industry. What do you sort of see that will change over the next sort of 3 to 5 years, and what makes you really excited about venture capital in Australia and more broadly the world?
Well, I think the first thing is you've got on the panel here, a number of your VC firms in the region, and each with its own sort of unique focus. There's a bit of overlap. I think we've all co-invested with each other at some point in time. So that in and of itself is a good thing. I think it's beholden on all of us to do the right thing by founders and articulate a clear thesis and support them along the way, and then at the end of the day deliver returns. That's the thing that earns us the right to be back here again in 5 years' time and hoping to support the next generation of founders. So I think the future looks bright in that case. There's some great portfolios here on the stage. I do think, as in venture capital globally, 3/4 of funds don't make money. So we need to sort of see that shake out. And there are something like 43 different ESVCLPs in Australia, which is the mandated which is a regulatory body that most VCs use. It's hard to see all of those succeeding. So I think there'll be a shakeout there in terms of what works and what doesn't work. And to be honest, VC is a bit of a scale game. It's much easier to deliver the services and help support global networks that we're all talking about when you've got hundreds of millions of dollars under management than it is 30, 40. So I think that's going to sort of to fall out. And I think that the last thing though is, we're just the enabler. I think to Niki's point, what we need to see and what we hope to see is more success stories, building local centres of excellence here that feed off, the next product manager jumps out and starts his or her own startup, and hopefully one of us will be here to support that, and that's when this sort of engine starts to work. And I think the beginnings are there. We do need more success stories, but every time there's a new a Wise Tech or Canva or Freelancer in the world, I think that in Australia that helps us. So I think if we keep doing that, then I think the future's bright.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to our 4 presenters. If you'd give them a round of applause. Thank you.